This is a video on analyzing visual texts, and this was adapted from Dr. Billy Harrah's presentation given at Texas Christian University. And so in this video, students will learn to analyze text for bias and use of common persuasive techniques, and to analyze characteristics of text. Lastly, we'll evaluate credibility of information sources and infer a writer's motives. So that's more of the analyzation, getting to that layer. And here's a little helpful acrostic for you when we're talking about design. And this is something, this is vocabulary that you can use when you are talking about visuals and trying to analyze them. And so you will never forget this acrostic, and I apologize if you were offended by it, but the C for this this acrostic on the 4 basic principles of design is contrast. Contrast attracts the attention of the reader or the viewer. And so that is talking about light colors next to dark colors, okay? Or it could be a contrast in subject matter. R stands for repetition. Repetition develops the organization of work and creates recognition. So think of a person or a brand or some sort of slogan that you see repeatedly on an advertisement, for instance. That repetition reinforces the organization of the work. It creates that recognition. Alignment is A, and that connects elements on the page to something else on the page. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to section off parts of an image or an advertisement to see how things are arranged. And P is proximity. Proximity groups related items, organizes information, and reduces clutter. So I want to show you something called the rule of thirds, and this is where you can analyze what is happening in each section of the image. If you were to divide the image into thirds horizontally and vertically, you can group the elements in those sections. So first of all, these lines on here aren't a part of the original advertisement, but they're drawn on here to represent the rule of thirds. So if you divided your this advertisement into thirds, you would see that his face and specifically his smile are resting in this corner, this third. And then if you go down to this third, you'll see the product on his wrist, which is that watch. And in this third, you'll see the logo of the company. And in this third, you see the watch with this sort of slogan or whatever it says above it. But this is one way that you should start looking at advertisements and seeing what is in each different third and why are they grouped like that and why did they align it like this. And so we're going to talk more about that in class. But this is just to get your mind going on looking at advertisements a little bit differently and seeing that there really is purpose behind the organization. What about a photograph? A photograph can have rule of thirds too, and it has a meaning to it. And so this one, obviously, this on this third of the picture, there are 3 men in a rickshaw, and then past them are more people, and you can see them going down this road. And so it's really showing motion and things like that. I'm not really sure what the context of this picture is, but this is another way that you can look at photographs differently, is to see what's on the third, and whatever's on the third is the subject of the picture, usually. And so this is what we're focusing on. We're not focusing on the road or the trees or what's down there. We're focusing on this section of the picture. That's what the photographer wanted us to look at. Almost everything is a sign or symbol in our culture. And so we need to talk about what that means when we're looking at visuals. And so signs and symbols consist of 2 elements, a signifier and a signified. The signifier is a physical sign. It is what you see, is what you hear. And then the signified is the meaning of the sign. That's what it means. So you have the signifier versus the signified. When analyzing signs or symbols, you need to consider the denotation, which is the dictionary definition, and the connotation, which is other meanings of the word, other meanings of it, and consider the combination of the two. And when you consider the combination of the two, that's when you're going to create beliefs about the message that are often false. And that's the fun part about looking at advertisements. Sometimes you can find a falsity in it because of how the denotation and the connotation combine. And so just as a quick example, a really common logo, FedEx. And this is when you look at the contrast of the colors between the purple and the Orange, that's one of the principles of design, is contrast. Even the alignment of the top of the F and the E and the D and the E and all this here. But what I want to focus on is where the E meets the X in X. And you should see a really common sign or symbol, and that is an arrow, a white arrow. And so if you look at this arrow, you should think of the signifier and the signified. The signifier, which is the physical sign, is this arrow itself. It's pointing right. And the signified is what it means. And so when you think of an arrow denotatively, you think it is a symbol that points from one place to another. Well, the connotation of that, based on this advertisement and based on what we know about this company, that arrow represents movement, things going from one place to another. And doesn't that just make sense with FedEx being a shipping company, that they would have an arrow in their logo? Absolutely. And so that's just one way of finding symbols and understanding what they mean in advertisements. And maybe you didn't ever notice that before, but now you will. Let's talk about specifically analyzing advertisements. Again, you need to consider the denotations, the connotations, and the related beliefs and assumptions that come out of it. And you need to try to see through the advertisement to its broader social and cultural realities. And then recognize the creators of advertisements and consider their credibility. Let's look at this. This is a classic Apple advertisement from the 80s. And this came out in a time when the computer revolution was kind of in a really prime state, and there was a lot of competition going on between Apple and Microsoft, and the text plainly states, think different. And then you see the Apple logo, and that was the logo back in the 80s. It wasn't white back then. They made it colorful. It was like this. And so you need to consider the denotation. It is telling us to think differently. Well, connotatively, think different has different meanings. Does that mean to think differently than the person next to you, or think differently than authority, or think different than, someone else? And what about the related beliefs and assumptions that come out of this simple advertisement? An assumption of this, that because it says think different, an assumption would be, well, the creators of this advertisement are telling us that we currently are not thinking different, and we should, because they're sending us a persuasive message in here. They're trying to persuade us to buy Apple products. And so there is an underlying assumption there that we can read from the advertisement that tells us that we don't think different and that we should. And so the second part is to see through the advertisement to its broader social and cultural realities. So again, like we said, the broader social reality is that as a whole, maybe Americans aren't thinking different than they should. And recognize the creators of advertisements and consider their credibility. Well, the creator of this advertisement, it was obviously a different thinking company called Apple, and it was trying to get people on with their products who would also think different. We could talk about that for a long time, but we have to move on. Analyzing photographs, you want to consider the photographer's purpose, or the photograph's purpose, what you know about the photographer and his or her credibility, and then consider any cultural representation. So that's cultural means ethnic or national. So I'm going to show you a really famous photograph that you've probably seen, and we're going to talk about the meaning behind it. This is Migrant Mother. This is taken by Dorothy Lang back during the Dust Bowl Depression type era, and you can see already, if you divided this on thirds, her eyes are on this top third. Okay, her hand is on this vertical third, and we see the expression of her face, and it sends a message about her situation. And so the purpose of this, there could be several purposes of this. Maybe one is to show viewers how desperately terrible this time was for a mother like this who had children to feed, and her situation wasn't ideal. And then consider what you know about the photographer and his or her credibility. So this photographer was obviously alive during this time period, so maybe they were credible and reputable about how difficult things were. And then consider any cultural representation. This represents America during a very difficult time, and a migrant mother who's just trying to provide for her family. And we could talk on and on about the implications of this image and what it really means. It's pretty powerful. Lastly, we're going to talk about analyzing charts. You need to consider the chart's purpose, consider the chart's source and the source's credibility, and recognize that charts can help an argument or it can weaken it. Okay, so let's look at one. I think this is interesting. It says put out more flags. I think someone added that on there, but the title of this is Net Imports of American Flags by the U.S., and it's in U.S. dollar sign monetarily. And so on the y-axis is the amount, and I think that is by, I don't even know. Let's say millions. It doesn't say. And then on the x-axis is the date. And so I think we actually have negative imports of American flags in 1998. But you can go through each year and see the amount of imports that Americans have had. And you should immediately notice in 2001 is the highest amount of imports of American flags. And then 2002 and 2003 are pretty high. But you'll see that it generally declines. And so you want to consider the chart's purpose. The chart's purpose is to show that in 2001 there was an increase in American flag imports into the U.S. Consider the chart's source and the chart's credibility. The source is fmaa.usa.com. I couldn't tell you what that is, but if this were in some sort of text where there was context, you could tell who the source was and determine if it was credible. But I want to get to the last point, which says to recognize that charts can help an argument or it can weaken it. So depending on what this chart was paired with, what argument it was paired with, this could really strengthen the argument. And so one of the first messages you should have gleaned from this chart was that in 2001, the most American flags were imported in a 14-year period that it spans on this chart. And the significance of it, when you look culturally and socially at the significance of it, we know that in 2001, 9/11 happened. So you can make a connection there. Someone could use this chart in some sort of essay about, patriotism and this and that. And this chart could really strengthen that argument. And so I just thought that was interesting. And so that's the end. And I thought I would end with this funny visual that is really pertinent right now. And there's an obviously American couple here. They're extremely overweight, and you can tell they're American because he's wearing American colors. And the wife says, Putin says Americans aren't exceptional. And the man says, not now. Can't you see I'm watching Miley Cyrus? And you see the flat screen TV with Miley's VMA performance on there. And it's funny. And so you can look on here and look at what is signified and what is the signifier and what a message is out of this. There are several purposes of this. And I think it's just really interesting the meaning that you can get from just one image or one cartoon or one advertisement. And so I hope that gets you prepared for what we're going to be doing in class and the projects that we're going to be doing. So thanks for tuning in. Bye.